folks, I just wanted to do a really quick video to give you some thoughts on what to look out for in the economy post-COVID. So I think the one thing that we could have all predicted, the minute that this was described as a global pandemic or announced as a global pandemic, we knew a downturn was going to come, especially with things like isolation and with lockdown, we knew it was going to affect the economy. The trickier question is how we are going to see changes in the economy as we start to come out of it. And what I want to do in this video is really get you to focus on three things, okay? First one is supply and demand, okay? So I want you to look out for, in the news, anything that kind of highlights supply and demand or shortages in supply or demand, for instance, taking place of both products and services, but also labour. I think labour is going to be a big thing. So if I give you an example, supply, we've seen shortages of microchips and home entertainment systems when customers wanted them the most, okay? And there's been disruption to the production of vehicles as well. So are we going to see a shortage of supply in certain areas? And we need to start thinking about or looking out for examples of where this is taking place. Is also going to be made worse by the fact that the cost of shipping, if we look at the cost of shipping between China and the west of America, so the west coast, it's quadrupled, which will then affect the supply of products coming over. But it might affect things in numerous ways. Are people going to start looking at shipping kind of from other areas? Are they going to start producing locally? We don't know what's going to happen. And so we need to be mindful of that. But please be aware that the cost of shipping has gone up significantly. So we should see some impact on supply taking place. In terms of demand, house prices have surged, which also suggests that rental costs will rise, and therefore the demand for housing, and I think for a lot of people as well, people that may have lived in flats, realising after isolation that they would much rather be in a more open house and have a garden, for people who have realised that they're going to be working from home and only going into the office a couple of times a week, maybe they're buying a house rather than living in an apartment, for instance. And so certainly the demand for housing has risen, but this will show itself in other areas too as we start going into a kind of post-COVID world as vaccinations rise. We're still waiting to see if demand for eating out will return to kind of pre-pandemic levels. So far, Eat Out, Help Out and the buzz kind of once you had, restaurants opening up has kind of helped. Similarly with the Euros, that's really helped pubs and restaurants. However, are we able to sustain that, or are people going to revert to their previous behaviour during the pandemic and be cautious? We don't know. We don't know for sure. When I was talking about labour supply and demand, there is a structural labour shortage in the service sector. So pubs, restaurants, a lot of the people who got let go of because they were only on like short-term contracts or whatever it may be, they have not returned. Okay, they have not returned to those sectors. And so pubs and restaurants are finding it really hard to recruit right now. Probably great news for students like yourselves if you want to look for part-time work, but they're really struggling to recruit reliable staff. What that means is, and that's been made worse by the fact that we've had this 10-day isolation period if the NHS app goes off. And so the government's really been pushed to change that, and we'll see some changes come out in the forthcoming kind of weeks and months about what you need to do if you get a notification on that app, okay, as the isolation rules change. Also, demand for labour in certain areas will continue to decrease as offices and retail spaces close. We need to be mindful of that, but demand in other areas may increase. What I do envisage happening is the gig economy. Essentially, if you don't know what that is, the gig economy is essentially people freelancing. So if you go onto websites like Fiverr, people will, design a logo for you. If I give you an example of how Fiverr is used, if you run a business and you need something designed, let's say it's a letterhead, all right? you're only going to have that designed every now and again. Your logo's only going to be designed every now and again. You might have posters designed just once a year or something like that and do them for the whole year. Rather than recruiting a designer full time, you just put it on a website like Fiverr and people bid for it. And then you can go and you can see their portfolios online and you can give it to whoever you like. And that could be anybody, anywhere around the world, okay? And so I do see the demand for that rising and more people going into that. Okay, I think just post-COVID, people have quite enjoyed working from home. Some of them, they'd rather have that independence and they might struggle to go back to work, or they've been let go of and they have no alternative. So certainly a lot of creative work, I think, will happen through the gig economy. So the first thing to look out for is supply and demand of both products, services, labour. Okay. The second thing to look out for is how are the governments going to balance the budgets? And I'm talking on a global scale. Many countries, the UK included, have given really generous financial support to industries and people. However, a year on, we need to know how are they going to claw this back. China has already started to tighten its credit, which means economic growth for them has slowed down. And they didn't see a massive slowdown throughout 2020. They managed to make it up pretty quickly. But their economic growth has slowed down because even they had to give a lot of financial support. So we need to think about what that is going to come in the form as. Is it going to be higher taxes? Is it going to be harder to borrow money, etc., etc.? We don't know, okay? We need to keep our eyes open for that. And see how different businesses react once the financial support of government is clawed away. And I'll do a separate video on that in different industries, okay? The third thing, so like I said, the first thing is supply and demand of products, services and labour. The second thing is how the government is going to balance its budget after its massive kind of financial support during COVID. The third thing is what will the future global divides look like? So people are increasingly saying the world isn't going to be divided by the haves and have-nots in terms of wealth. It's going to be who's being vaccinated and who's not. Already we can see if you've had both of your vaccinations, you're more freely able to travel to certain countries than if you have not. So access to certain goods and services is becoming limited depending on your vaccination status, okay? Don't forget that the UK is leading in terms of vaccinations, so you need to think about this from a global perspective. So if I give you an example, in July 2021, only 1 in 4 people around the world had a vaccine, okay? And you're not going to fight a pandemic, with such low rates. And only 1 in 8 was fully protected, okay? Also, it's not necessarily a rich and poor divide. If you go to certain states in the US, they've got a scarily low level of vaccination, which means that they're more susceptible to the Delta variant in certain kind of areas and regions. There is a rich and poor divide, don't get me wrong, but what I'm saying is it's not the only divide. So if I give you an example in terms of rich and poor, it's predicted that in 2021, the poorest countries that are short of vaccines will grow less than their richer counterparts, okay? And that's not happened a lot in the last 25 years. In the last 25 years, if you look at the poorest countries, a lot of businesses are moving there to take advantage of like labour supply or whatever it may be, and move manufacturing or whatever it may be there. But a lot of those poorer countries have grown at a faster rate than the UK has, let's say, or America has. However, that is changing. A lot of those poorer countries are being affected. They're almost getting a double whammy. They've got lack of vaccinations, but also they've got lack of growth happening as well, which isn't bringing a lot of money in, okay? Emerging markets are likely to face higher interest rates due to COVID as well. So Brazil, Mexico and Russia have already raised their interest rates. So that's important for you to know. And it'll be interesting to see whether others raise theirs. Other questions that are being asked is, are we going to see a rise in inflation? We just don't know. So these are all things that you should be looking out for during the summer or when we first come back. You need to be looking out for these things in the papers, and we'll be discussing these in lessons.